I think Lupa perhaps might represent the future of the fusion meta. Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. I feel like we can somewhat denote the future of fusion characters on the whole by just looking at Lupa, and to be honest, it's a future that I really like the look of. Prepare for some utter fusion glaze, ladies and gentlemen, because boy do I have quite a few good things to say. Up until this point, every Fusion Limited 5-star that we've gotten has been very interesting kit-wise. They tend to have extremely versatile design, if you will. Lupa's the third limited fusion that Kuro has made so far, and we can already see plenty of her kit details in-game. It appears as if there are some general themes that each limited unit of this element carries, which I believe are present in Lupa as well. We'll start with Changli. Whenever this lovely Phoenix lady first came out, she was somewhat of a sleeper release meta-wise. Don't get me wrong, people were indeed excited for her, considering how utterly stunning she is. But in terms of meta viability, she didn't feel anywhere near as impactful as the Sentinel freaking Resonator that came before her, Jinshi. That dragon lady ended up blowing up the entire game for quite a long time, and to this day, remains as an excellent DPSing option. However, something that we literally never could have predicted back then ended up happening. I genuinely feel, with at least a decent level of skill, Changli ended up becoming a more valuable pull than Jinshi over time. What led to this? Well, she's easily able to slot into many teams. I usually don't value this quality on its own, because it doesn't really matter if you can slot into a bunch of mid-teams, but the reason as to why it's so awesome for the Phoenix Lady is because with the right amount of skill, she can genuinely end up outputting some fantastic performance of units if you learn how to quick swap effectively. With that being said, she's also constantly getting new teams. When she first launched, she didn't really have a lot of teams to choose from. You could use her with Encore, but otherwise, there weren't many impressive places to utilize her. But as the patches have gone on, this lady has basically tripled the amount of teams that she's able to play in, thanks to her technical nature. Whether she can work well in a team or not just depends on whether you can learn the quick swap windows for that respective DPS. Plus, her outro buff can buff Liberation %, which ends up being pretty handy sometimes. For instance, bluffing up Fleur-de-Lis's big finisher move in Cardathia Changli quick swap. Then you've got Brent Weathering Waves. I will say, this guy did end up being more restrictive than Changli, since a large chunk of his damage output was sealed behind his signature weapon, unlike how the Phoenix Lady is one of the more free-to-play friendly characters in this game, being able to utilize Emerald of Genesis quite impressively. However, there were still some core components of Changli's kit that I felt were carried over, his versatility being one of those things. While he doesn't really quick swap as smoothly as the Phoenix Lady can, it's still something within reason for him, and he ends up being able to fit into a whole lot of teams just doing his regular rotation, because he's a fantastic second slot teammate on the whole. Not to mention how he buffs skill % on outro, which is super valuable, because we have a couple of great DPSs that really enjoy this. Carlotta being one of my favorite examples. He's great to use it for if you don't have access to Joja. And shoot, so is Changli. You get the idea. These fusions aren't restrictive by any means. He also ended up being a fantastic teammate for the former fusion, also being able to offer some playstyle variety. You could now play her more like a hyper carry if you didn't want to quick swap her, which made her far more accessible, because Brant's outro made that worth doing. However, you could still opt for a more high-skill quick swap based playstyle between them in order to maximize both of their potential. So, how do these qualities carry on to Lupa? Well, she also appears to have a pretty useful outro skill, since it features basic % buffing. That's only really going to benefit Brant upon her initial release, but over time, it's likely that she'll fall into Brant's situation, where she ends up being a good substitute for some characters if you don't have their best installed teammates. She also seems to be keeping up the general trend of fusion units being applicable in numerous different ways. Now it is true that she's more focused in on the niche of this particular element. She has plenty of specific buffs that tailor very well to units that are a part of it, such as her insane 15% fusion red shred in a mono team, and also the buttload of fusion amp that she offers. However, she still interacts with these characters in a very flexible way. If you only have either Changli or Brant, you will likely be able to use Lupa as their second stall teammate and have a grand old time. In fact, she ends up being excellent for the Pirate Lad in particular, because her outro skill is so well tuned to him. So much like how the Phoenix Lady was able to hypercarry more effectively after the Pirate came out, it's now his turn to achieve heightened hypercarry potential. With that being said, I'm not sure if that'll be worth running if you don't have Unflickering Valor. As it currently stands, you only want to run Hyper Brant if you have access to a signature. That might change with Lupa, but nothing can be said for certain yet, though I do believe it will most definitely be an upgrade. This also frees up Sanhua, and may possibly turn this team from being an if you want to, into an actual noteworthy consideration. And just because I think she was designed more in Brant's favor, doesn't necessarily mean that she'll be neglecting Changli. People always find a way to make quick swap work with this woman, so I think there's a good chance that they'll have quick swap potential with one another. And consider this, Lupa's not just a support. Much like both Changli and Brant, she's going to be capable of offering her own damage contributions to the team as well. This seems to be a general trend that runs in the Fusion bloodline. Everyone's able to offer their own damage, has some quick swap viability, and offers plenty of ways to play. Let's not forget about Encore either. She still remains as being a pretty competitive DPS, even now. This unit is a freaking standard character, and plenty of people are gonna have access to her. So even outside of the core units that she was likely intended to be played with, she's gonna have a more accessible synergy too. And this isn't some good-for-nothing synergy either. It's a splendid DPS that has stood the test of time up until this point. And basically every limited Fusion 5-star that's released up until this point is able to work with Encore to some degree. Also, both her and Brant share qualities of being able to assist people with skill issue. The Pirate Lad does this for his healing and shielding, and Lupa for being able to offer interruption recovery. Changli doesn't have anything quite like this, but it does contribute to the idea that most fusion units tend to have quite jam-packed kits. It's not like this is moldy jam either. We're talking about a jack-of-all-trades, master of them all. So, while I do believe that Lupa is more restricted to being within the fusion niche, as opposed to the 2 limited Fusion 5-stars that came before her, there's some clear components that have shown through in her kit. There's plenty of playstyle variety on offer here. She's able to provide you with multiple genuinely useful abilities, and she's going to help expand upon the currently existing Fusion playstyle. Every limited release of the element that we've gotten thus far has helped to push it forward, in what is a positive direction in my opinion. Now, what exactly do I mean when I say that I believe Lupa to be the future of Fusion? Well, consider that this is the 3rd limited Fusion character that we've gotten up until this point. They've all followed a relatively similar structure, despite being fundamentally different in what their best qualities are. I feel that basically every character that is released so far that is a part of this particular family of units has been extremely effectively versatile. I'm not sure how many would agree, but I personally think that the Fusion characters have the best kit design in the game. The only real blunder I can think of when I look at them collectively was making Brant so reliant on a signature weapon in order to effectively trigger 5-piece tie-breaking courage. He's still a good pull to make without his weapon if you have Changli, because his outro skill is amazing. However, his wider versatility does get hurt if you're either stuck using him on Overture, or if you're using him on Emerald of Genesis on 5-piece of the classic Fusion set. It's not that he's literally unviable, but you do miss out on a good chunk of damage. That is genuinely it. That alone is the most glaring flaw of the Fusion archetype. Brant's build being hard to balance. Granted, it is hard to balance. I do feel like we need some cheaper alternatives for him so that more people can trigger tie-breaking courage without needing a signature, but that's it. Everything else about the wider archetype just oozes with flexibility. You can either play them all in one team to form one insane mono-fusion comp, or you can play them all separately across many different teams to max out your vigor management, or to help you out in Whimpering Wastes. And that's another thing. All of these characters have proven to be fantastic in every game mode, especially wuwa. I fully expect Lupa to impress in this regard as well. Each fusion so far has been fantastic at filling in damage downtimes when they become available. I don't see why she'd be any exception. There is just so much value up for grabs when it comes to these units. I will say that Lupa in particular does want to be played with other fusions. I do think that it's unlikely that you'll see her outside of those teams until we get more basic percent DPSs, as Brant's the main unit that I believe she's going to be supporting. However, I feel that this could be the future of Fusion going forward. This will likely be challenged if they ever decide to make a unit of the element, but centered around negative statuses, because characters of that archetype are inherently more restrictive due to how they always want an applier unit of sorts to sustain their main damage output. We've seen this happen 3 times over at this point, but for most baseline Fusion units, I would be happy if they kept this up. It could just be a coincidence that characters of this element just so happen to end up with the most interesting kits, with the most opportunity for high amounts of skill expression, while still offering a more casual playstyle option for people who don't want to engage with quick swapping. I think Lupa was well handled in this regard. Yes, she is the most niche of the current fusions, but I want you to actually think about that for a moment. The most niche fusion unit still offers infinitely more playstyle variety than the average negative status team. Don't get me wrong, those teams do still feature some degree of variety, but Premium Fusion just offers you a lot more in my opinion. Plus, this is just my personal opinion, but they're my favorite teams to take on holograms with, considering that Lupa is going to be excellent for Brant, one of the most comfortable units to use against holograms. She's only going to further the Fusion agenda against some of the hardest content that this game has to offer. Plus, because these units are typically based around managing smaller damage instances, well, I guess Brant is a big forte nuke, but you get what I mean. A lot of their kits can easily be accessed via their normals or skill, which makes them super comfy for the overworld. I hope Lupa can further the overworld agenda some more. It's kind of absurd how comfortable Brant and Changli are to use when you're exploring. It's probably pretty obvious at this stage, but I feel like the Fusion Gang has to be the most well-designed group of units in Wuthering Waves if we're talking in terms of kit design, just based on my personal thoughts at least. It feels like you get insane bang for your Astrites, because holy heck, you get quite the variety of good qualities of this bunch. I especially recommend this gang of characters to people who like high skill expression. More specifically Changli though. Brant's pretty easy to play. Needless to say, Fusion fans, rise up. How about yourself? Do these units impress you or not so much? Let me know down below. I have a second channel where I just kind of cover whatever I feel like in regards to gacha games. Head on over and check that out if you're interested. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I feel that Lupa represents the future of Fusion. This has been Juice, signing out. and let's hope that future fusions can keep this up.